Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to hear evidence from Mr. Robert Black, who was formerly the Chief Executive of the TMO. Is that right, Mr. Millett? You're going to call Mr. Black?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Good morning, members of the panel. I now call Mr. Black.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Black.
Morning.
I understand that you're content to take the oath.
Yeah.
There should be a testament there on the bench next to you. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
Can you take the book in your right hand, please, and repeat the words on the screen?
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. And sit down, please. Make yourself comfortable. Yes, do get yourself some water.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you. When you're ready, Mr. Millett, yes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Black, good morning.
Good morning.
Can I start by thanking you very much for coming to the inquiry and assisting us with our investigations? We're extremely grateful to you. I'm going to ask you a number of questions over the course of the next 3 days or so. If you have any difficulty understanding any of those questions, please say, and I can repeat the question or put the question in a different way. Can I please also ask you to keep your voice up so that the transcriber who sits to your right can get down every word you're saying fully and completely, and also ask you not to nod or shake your head, but to say yes or no as the case may be, because
Right.
It is the words and not the gestures that go onto the transcript. If you feel you need a break at any point other than the scheduled breaks we will take in the customary way, please just say. We'll take a break mid-morning and mid-afternoon, according to the chairman. Now, you've made a number of statements to the inquiry. I want to show you the one we're going to use in your examination. It's on it's on your screen, or will appear on your screen, and it's dated the 8th of February 2019 at TMO 50888. Is that the first page of your witness statement?
It is.
And it's, as you can see, in response to a Rule 9 request of the 24th of October 2018 from the inquiry. Can we please go to page 35? We'll see a date there, 8th of February 2019, and a signature above the date. Is that your signature?
It is.
Now, before I ask you whether the contents are true, I believe that you have some corrections that you would wish to make to this statement. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Let's look at first, please, at paragraph 26 on page 5. It starts at the bottom of page 4, I think, but is there a correction you would wish to make to that paragraph? I think we need the bottom of page 4 for that, please, which starts, TMO did not in any way manage the statutory utility companies.
It's on the second page.
Page 5, please. What correction would you make to that
It's
paragraph?
the last line, starting, starting to provide LFB with all information required. The last sentence, TMO respected LFB's decision not to supply documents, etc., that LFB did not wish to receive. When I reviewed this document, apologies, it's the first time I've looked at it in 2 years, I couldn't quite understand what I was meaning, and I've really tried, but I'd rather say that I don't quite understand what I'm meaning now.
Right. So would you delete that sentence?
I would delete it, please.
Right. Page 12, please, paragraph 63. Is there a correction or change you would wish to make to that paragraph?
Yes, it is, and it's on the starting residents on universal credit and 2 officers to help support residents who are assessed to be vulnerable. When I reviewed this, I wasn't quite sure if that was right, and actually I would like to change it. So the 2 officers were tenancy support officers.
Tenancy support officers. So we add the words tenancy support between the word to and the word officers in that line.
And to change the word vulnerable.
To what?
To be supported in terms of areas such as ASB, asset antisocial behaviour, rent arrears, and support generally a bit more than the current neighbourhood officers could supply.
Then paragraph 151 on page 29, I believe, is a further paragraph to which you want to make a change. Is that right?
Yes. Again, when I reviewed this, and certainly since I've been preparing for today, I've been looking at lots of documents, and it's clear I missed the fire in 2010 at Grenfell Tower.
You missed it.
Yeah, I apologise for that.
Does that mean you forgot about it when
I
you
just
did your
didn't
statement?
remember it.
Yes.
It's only
and
through
then-
looking through the papers.
Yes. And then page 31, paragraph 165 to 167, I believe you have a change or changes to make to that.
Generally, again, I think it's here that when I was reading through the paperwork, preparing for it, I've come across emails and conversations that obviously show that I did know about certain things. So I'd just like to be aware of that.
Very good. Well, we'll come back to that perhaps in due course when we examine those paragraphs in the course of your evidence.
Yep.
Subject to those changes, having read this statement recently, can you confirm that the contents are true?
Yes.
Have you discussed your statement or your evidence with anybody before coming here today?
The only person was when I made a phone call to an ex-colleague to clarify the job title of the Tennessee support officers. But I didn't discuss my evidence.
Thank you very much. Now I'm going to start some questions with your background and qualification and experience. You gave evidence, as you will recall, in September 2018 at phase 1 of this inquiry. You started work with the TMO, I think, is this right, in 2009 as Chief Executive Officer?
Yes, May.
In the May?
Yeah.
Are you able to tell us when in the May?
I was appointed in March by the panel, and it was supposed to be the end of May, but the Chief Exec who was in place left before I came, so they asked me to come in earlier. So I imagine it'd be about the middle of May, but I can't recall precisely.
And this was your first Chief Executive role, is that right?
Yes.
Yes. Can you help us with training that you received? Do you have any specific professional qualifications?
No.
Do you have any specific health and safety qualifications or experience?
Not qualifications. In terms of over 30 years working in housing, I've had numerous health and safety courses at different levels as I've worked myself through the career. And generally, when it was lower, it'd be sort of practical health and safety within a scheme or a hostel or whatever. As I got into management, it was about wider management health and safety responsibility. And at the TMO, we did training on health and safety. I'd had that with my induction. And before I left, before the fire, we had introduced modules of training for all staff, which included health and safety, which I completed.
Have you had any training that deals with fire safety in a social housing management role?
Not specifically on that matter.
Did you get any fire safety training at Circle 33 or Circle Anglia when you were at those organisations? No. Now, you told us that you became Chief Executive Officer, CMO of the TMO in 2009. Did you have any fire safety training when you arrived?
I was introduced to Janice Ray, who was the health and safety officer, manager at that time, and she explained her role to me and what she was doing at that time. That was my introduction.
What did she, in a sentence, can you tell us what she told you about her role?
Her role was health and safety manager for the TMO, where she was advised the company on health and safety, fire safety.
Now, did you have any training on fire risk systems or fire risk management systems when you arrived and took up the job of CEO?
No.
No. Would it follow from that you had no training on fire safety in the context of asset management or housing stock at that point or after that?
In terms of when I arrived in May, there was no specific training because the chief exec had left and I came in to pick up the reins in a sense. Sort of, as I met people who were still there, they explained their role to me. So the members of the executive, the members of the senior management team, what they did. So it was more a narrative of what they were responsible for, so I could get an understanding.
Did you have any training, whether before you arrived at the TMO or after you had arrived at the TMO, on any aspect of the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order 2005? Or the RRO, as I'm going to call it.
Not specific training, but I was informed by Janice Ray in terms of the work they were doing to implement that.
So, to be clear, you had no training on it, but Janice Ray told you what work they were doing to implement the requirements of that legislation?
Yes.
I see. I'm going to assume that you had no training at all, either before or during your entire time at the TMO, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, on something called the Sleeping Guide, which is HM Government Fire Safety Risk Assessment Sleeping Accommodation 2006.
I'd heard about it because I was member of a National Federation of Almo's Chief Exec group, and they had policy briefings every now and then. So there were policy briefings from that time every now and then about the RRO and aspects of it. But it was quite brief at a high level type of stuff.
And what about the LACOR's housing fire safety guidance on fire safety provisions for certain types of existing housing?
I can't recall that.
That's a 2008 publication.
No.
No. What about PAS 79 of 2012? There was one in 2007 as well. Did you ever get any training on that specifically?
I've heard of it, but not any training specifically on it.
You've heard of it. Again, did you get any policy briefings about the contents of either of those editions of that PAS?
No.
No. And what about the LGA, Local Government Association publication in the summer of 2011, Fire Safety in Purpose-Built Blocks of Flats?
Yes, I knew about that.
You knew about it?
Yes.
Did you ever get
Yes.
any training on it?
So, not training, so that guidance was being developed and the National Federation of Almos, of which I was a member, had a policy group which was contributing to the development of it. So as a chief exec group, we got briefings on how that was going, and then when the guidance came out, we got briefings on that as well. And I had, at the time, reviewed the documentation.
Who gave you the briefings on the LGA guidance?
That's when I was at National Federation of Almos. Plus, Janice told me as well, because she would be. So I was going at a chief exec level, and there was also a policy group at National Federation of Almos, which she would go to. And since then, she would get similar briefings, probably a bit more detail.
Were these briefings in paper form that you could read at your leisure, or such as you had
Sort of
any?
presentation type stuff. There might have been some papers at the time as well.
Now, what about something called PAS 7 from 2013? Do you remember having any training on that?
No, I haven't had any training on that.
And again, was that something which you knew about or had any high-level briefings on?
I can't recall at the moment.
Did you get any training specifically on the role of the responsible person under the RRO, or who that was?
I think in my induction, not my induction, well, I had an induction, but when going through and understanding the company, I began to understand the role of the responsible person. And as we developed a health and safety statement, that was the role I was to take on within the company.
I see. Did you have any training, you were, I think, already at the TMO, on the lessons to be learnt from the Lakanal House fire in Camberwell in the summer of 2009?
I would have picked that up. I'm sure there must have been a briefing at the TMO, but I obviously picked that up at different areas I went. So I was also a member of the National Federation of Housing and attended CI8s, which is Chartered Institute of Housing.
Right.
So there was quite a lot of briefings at that time on that subject.
Yes. Did you ever receive any training on or ever read any briefings in respect of fire risk assessments?
I knew about fire risk assessments and the principle of them, but I didn't. That was something that Janice was involved in developing for the company.
You say Janice was involved in. Did in your role as CEO, did you have an overall supervisory position? in respect of her work in relation to FRAs?
No, Janice, I don't know if it's useful if I, in terms of when I joined, explain the structure and what happened. So when I joined, quite a lot of people left soon after. Janice was health and safety manager, and I linked her in with Lynette Pemberton, who was health HR manager. And as quite soon after that, Lynette became a member executive in terms of responsible for training and development in HR. And because of, there was very few other people about, and because of Lynette's role, I linked Janice into that role. So she was managed by Lynette Pemberton.
Let's look at the governance then. You deal with your appointment in your witness statement on page 2, if we can go to that, please, paragraph 11. That's where it starts. And at paragraph 12, you say that you were interviewed by TMO board members and RBKC's Executive Director of Housing and Environment. Do you remember which board members interviewed you specifically?
It was a mixture of residents and independents. I'm afraid I can't remember individuals at that time. There would have been a leaseholder who was a board member, and there would have been a tenant, and I think there was 2 independents. The chair would have been there. I'm just trying to remember how many that comes up to.
And you say you were interviewed by RBKC's Executive Director of Housing and Environment. Was that Laura Johnson?
No, that was Jean Denteith.
Jean Denteith.
Who was at that time the Executive Director of Housing, Social Services and Environmental.
Now, as CEO, you reported to the board, is that right?
Yes.
And the board was a non-executive board, is that right?
Yes.
And that meant that it didn't get involved in the day-to-day management of the TMO?
Yes.
That was your job?
Yes.
Yeah. And the board was reliant on you, is this right, for accurate, timely and complete information about what was happening in the business?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, if you go on to paragraph 13 at the foot of page 2, you say, when I joined, there were a number of concerns raised, both at my interview by the panel and once I was formally in position. Just pausing there. Who was it? Do you remember who raised the concerns in your interview? Was it TMO or was it RBKC?
No, I think you have to go back to the beginning. So when I applied for the job, the role was being managed by a set of consultants. I think it was Veritas. So I applied, and then they contacted me saying they wanted to do a long list interview, it's called. So we had a telephone conversation. I then had a sort of informal meeting with the consultants who were running it, and they whittled down through that process the number of candidates they wanted to take to the board. Through that process, they were telling you about the organisation. It's a tenant management organisation, a membership organisation, this and that, about how it had got 3 stars, excellent, from the audit commission. But they were also raising in terms of issues that had been coming through in terms of performance not being great, concerns RBKC had about its performance, that sort of, so that they're trying to paint a picture, to be fair, so that you don't go in blind. When I got shortlisted for the final interview in front of the panel, you were giving a test basically to, here's the issues, come up with a 6-month improvement plan. So you basically had to look at their business, their finances, and then come up and do a small presentation in front of the panel. And then they asked you questions, and then that was the end of that part of the interview, and then you were went away, and then they decided to pick you.
Right. I actually asked you just who it was who had raised these concerns. I'm not sure you've actually answered that question.
Apologies. So some concerns were raised by the consultants on behalf of the company as they were telling candidates. And then the panel, it would have been the chair, as you went through the process, explained the circumstances. And then you had to prepare the presentation based on that.
Right. Now, paragraph 14 of your statement, you list the issues. If we go to page 3, and you list them as governance, the repair service, general KPI performance, resident engagement, customer complaints and overall satisfaction, asset management and overall relationship with RBKC. Now, I just want to focus, if I can, for a moment on the words customer complaints and overall satisfaction. Given that customer complaints and overall satisfaction was expressly part of your remit, did you regard it as your responsibility from the start to get to the bottom of what was causing any dissatisfaction and to understand its causes?
I think it was my role to understand, as you say, causation of why it was happening, so I needed to understand some of the history. I then had to understand, because there's a key link between customer satisfaction, customers' feeling and satisfaction. In my previous job at Circle 33, as Exec Director of Customer Services, we did a huge amount of work on that. So complaints is only one aspect of customer satisfaction, that's the negative end. But there's lots of stuff in between that actually drives what makes the customer or the resident happy with the service. So in a sense, I think that's one of the things why we spent a lot of time looking at that. They also explained there had been a report, which I didn't really know about until from RBKC had commissioned someone to do a report, I think from complaints from leaseholders. I can't remember the name of the author.
Is that the Mamoli report?
That's the one, yeah.
We're going to come to that in detail
so
in a moment.
I'd heard of that, but hadn't seen it. I think those two things, driving, understanding your customer.
So I think the answer is yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Can I take it, given your answer being yes, that you were at all times familiar with the detailed terms of the TMO's complaints policy and procedures?
Yes.
Yes. And without going to it, we can if you want to. Would you agree that it casts the TMO as a service provider and the resident as a customer?
Yes.
Yes, rather like a consumer relationship.
Yes.
Yes. Did you also understand, however, that the TMO was not just providing a consumer service, but people's homes?
Of course.
Yeah. And given that the TMO was providing people with homes, did you understand that it was reasonable for them to expect to repose a high degree of trust in the TMO?
Yes.
Yes. And particularly when it came to safety in their homes, yes?
Yes.
Yes. So this wasn't just about having satisfied customers, but having residents who could trust you utterly to keep them safe in their homes.
I would say that's in every job I've done, not just a TMO.
Yeah. And would you also say that if they felt unsafe in their homes, particularly in numbers, that would tend to indicate to you a fundamental, perhaps existential problem with the TMO?
No.
No?
No.
You wouldn't?
I suppose the issue you've gone on to this in the sense there is background to stuff, which I don't know if you're going to come on to in terms of what the TMO is.
Well, I'm just asking you as a general
membership.
proposition. Would you accept as a general proposition, given that you were the CEO, that if people felt unsafe in their homes, at least in numbers, then that would tend to indicate a fundamental and perhaps existential problem with the way the TMO was working?
I'm not sure if I agree with that.
All right. We'll see how that plays out later. Can we go to paragraph 23 of your witness statement on page 4? You say there the TMO was a non-specialist organisation, typical of
Can you confirm
typical of a social housing manager of its
Sorry,
size.
confirm what paragraph you're talking about? Sorry.
23.
23.
I'm sorry, I'm reading from the wrong one. It's my fault. Page 4, paragraph 23. The company was therefore a resident-led organisation with a majority of local tenants on its board to manage the council's housing stock. The board of TMO operated independently of RBKC, except on matters relating to the Housing Revenue Account, HRA, with an internal audit process commissioned by the TMO board and conducted by external auditors. How was the TMO's independence restricted in relation to the HRA?
So the HRA was a Housing Revenue Account, which is a local authority account which the rents went into. Up until 2012, the HRA was managed by the government, so the rents went into a central account, and then the government gave each local authority a grant. So the local authority, depending on where you are, didn't always get the same amount of money that it raised through the rents. So, say So that's key. And then, because it was run by the government, they would only give you a grant per year. So it's very local authority, sort of where they operate. It's very difficult for long-term planning when you're getting a one-year grant, which you don't know the amount. And completely different from the housing association sector, where you generally worked on 3-year, 5-year and 30-year plans, because you knew your income coming in. So the way we were affected is that the RBKC didn't know how much money it would get each year. Therefore, actually, the TMO didn't know how much money it would get until the local authority knew. And because the local authority, the way they're funded and legalised, they can't commit until they know how much money they have. So what it means is, instead of knowing well before, when your financial year starts in 1st of April, that you've got, say, 3 million, you might not get the government grant to June. So therefore, actually, all RBKC could do is, within its terms of how it had to legally operate, is give you an indication of how much money you would receive. So it's a sort of very difficult, within all local authorities, to plan long-term in terms of investment. The impact on that, historically, is you get very low investment across local authority housing until the Labour government introduced decent homes. And decent homes was based on a recognition that local authority housing hadn't had the investment it required compared to other sectors. And that meant things like kitchens, windows, bathrooms had deteriorated and people weren't living in great condition. So decent homes was a direct grant to actually identify programmes of investment in social housing in England.
Forgive me for interrupting you, and you may have come to the end of your answer. Does this tell us that when you say the Board of TMO operated independently of RBKC except on matters relating to housing revenue account, you mean there that the Board of the TMO, and indeed the whole TMO, depended on RBKC for money coming from the housing revenue account?
Yes.
Yes. I'm slightly more interested in operational matters, though. Is it the case that the board of the TMO would not operate independently of RBKC in respect of money coming from the housing revenue account when making decisions?
Well, the board of the TMO was dependent on RBKC providing it with its management fee. Therefore, the TMO had to, if it got given an indication, then had to base its service and its delivery on the money that would be given to it. So, yeah, as a board, they couldn't go and order things without knowing those income come in. Yeah. They had, however, stuff they did outside that, which they had reserves. So they had their own reserves as a company, which they'd built up over a number of years. But in terms of, they hadn't really used them before.
Really what I'm seeking to tease out here is whether you're actually saying that the decision-making process at board level within the TMO, when it came to the housing revenue account, was not independent of RBKC.
Yes.
Thank you. Now, you go on to say, well, let's go look at paragraph 29 at page 5. And we can take this, I think, quite quickly. Page 5, paragraph 29, you say all day-to-day operations of TMO were managed by an executive team who reported to me as chief executive, supported by 3 executive director. They were executive director for operations, financial services and ICT, and people, performance and governance. Although they had the title executive director, like me, they were not statutory directors. Now, you've identified the individuals there. Although you don't say it, it's right, isn't it, that Barbara Matthews was Executive Director of Financial Service and ICT from July 2015, wasn't she?
Yes.
Yes. And she was responsible for health and safety, and in particular fire safety, wasn't she?
Yes.
Was there a particular logic for health and safety being covered by the Finance and ICT Director?
I had a small team, and when I looked at that team, I had to. The team had changed, so it reduced in size, and we had to then look at the portfolio of stuff that people had. So I had to look at workloads, responsibility, and how they would manage it. And when we looked, Barbara was quite a good fit for in terms of actually her role, in terms of actually how much capacity she had to take on.
What was Barbara Matthews' background? Was it financial service, ICT, or health and safety?
It was a range of background. I mean, her background, as far as I can remember, she worked when she was younger in the sort of private sector, a range of roles, and then moved into the housing sector. She told me that she'd had a wide brief in certain organisations before. I can't remember specifically if she said she'd managed health and safety.
Right. Did you recruit Barbara Matthews yourself?
She was recruited. I'm just trying to remember. Sorry. Yes, I would have been part of the team who recruited her.
Yeah. Did you check her experience of fire risk management as part of the process to recruit her?
Not specifically.
Why not? Why didn't you?
It just didn't come up. Apologies.
Right. Did you know, or do you now know, whether she had any previous responsibility for fire risk management in a senior role?
I can't remember.
Right. Did you ask her?
I can't remember that long ago, sorry.
Do you know whether she had any experience of managing health and safety more generally in the context of social housing stock?
I'm not sure.
Right. We've heard her evidence. Can you account for having a head of health and safety who had no health and safety background?
I can't, because I've worked in other places, other organisations, where health and safety sits under executive director. I've not worked in an organisation where health and safety is a sole focus of an executive role, and executive directors tend to have broad portfolios depending on their management. So in a sense, they're managing specialists. It doesn't mean they're specialists themselves.
Yes, that wasn't quite an answer to my question. Can you account for having a head of health and safety, in effect, who had no health and safety background?
Because I appointed her.
Well, that's...
Because when we were recruiting, I'm trying to remember.
Why didn't you recruit someone specifically with a health and safety background?
Because to have a specific role, I wouldn't have had the income to be able to have someone sitting at executive specifically doing health and safety. I can't remember the details from recruiter. Apologies. So it may have been in the pack or the questioning, but that's quite a long time ago.
Right. It sounds from your answer, when you say, I wouldn't have had the income to be able to have someone sitting specifically doing health and safety, that this was a question of money.
I think it's a question. So can you? So
is that right?
Yes, it's a question of money, because in terms of an organisation has to live within its means, and in the sense of between 2009 and continuing, local authority funding across the country and with everybody has been cut. So therefore, I didn't have a big enough budget to have specific health and safety role on my executive. What I wanted was an executive director to manage my health and safety management.
Right, Ms. Black, it sounds to me, tell me if this is right or not, that you regarded the role of executive director as one which required general managerial experience without any specific experience of the departments under its responsibility.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Did you ask or think of asking RBKC for more money so that you could recruit somebody with a specific health and safety background?
The situation of the TMO, that the year I took over, because they'd agreed a 5% cut with RBKC, the company lost 500,000 because they hadn't, although they did agree a cut, the executive and board hadn't agreed how to finance that cut. So really after that, the TMO, then had to legally have a small surplus. So we worked on producing each year within the management fee a surplus of 36,000. In terms of asking RBKC for more money, we were lucky within the sector that in general, for a management fee went up 1%, while across the sector, with the colleagues I worked with, people were experiencing 5, 10, 15% cut per year. This was what was happening in local authorities, just with across lots of other statutory services.
Yes, this is 2009, I think, is what you say in your answer. What about in 2015? Did you think
2015, I think we had a cut of 2% to our budget.
Now, let's look at TMO's health and safety policy from July 2010. TMO 100310078, please. This is a document which, at the very foot of the page and the foot of your screen, Mr. Black, you can see your name as Chief Executive and the date July 2010, yes?
Yes.
It's entitled Health and Safety Policy, Section 1, Statement of Intent. It's a document that runs for some 8 pages. It has your name at the bottom, as you can see. And if you look in the second paragraph, it says this: the legal, operational and financial responsibility for the management of health and safety rests with the Chief Executive of the TMO, and each head of division and manager is responsible for the implementation, execution, control and monitoring of this policy. Now, you would agree, is this right, that meant that you were ultimately responsible for health and safety, and in particular fire safety at the TMO?
Yes.
Yes. What did you understand to be your responsibilities as Chief Executive in respect of health and safety in general and fire safety in particular?
In general, I recognised I needed a competent person within the organisation, and that was Janice Ray. And, sorry, what was the second part there?
And fire safety in particular.
And Janice Ray's position covered fire safety as well.
So is your answer that your responsibility was to make sure you had someone who was sufficiently experienced and expert in health and safety in general and fire safety in particular?
Yes.
Yes. And how did you ensure that the health and safety policy contained in this document was implemented?
It went to all, well, so I had an overall structure, so we had policies in place. How we delivered it was through our organisational structure in terms of actually appropriate people with skills. We, sorry, just hold a second. Had plans in place. We measured, we reported, and we audited.
Plans, measured, reported, audited, and having the right people.
Yeah, and the people were key for me.
And how did you yourself, as CEO, monitor the carrying out of this health and safety policy in those respects?
In the sense we had a corporate health and safety committee, which Janice reported into, and that the range of people who attended because of their roles and responsibility, and those people would then cascade roles and responsibilities through their teams.
Now, if we go to the fourth paragraph, it says this: the TMO will ensure that all persons are competent to carry out the duties asked of them, and will provide adequate information, instruction, training and necessary supervision. It will provide an in-company appointed health and safety professional who will be responsible for providing advice on all health and safety and welfare matters. You, as the Chief Executive of the TMO, were responsible, weren't you, for ensuring the competence of all staff in this respect?
In the sense of, I wouldn't recruit every individual, but in the principle of when jobs are advertised, they went through a professional process, depending on the level, might be with consultants, with their job description, and in terms of through interview.
Yeah.
So I delegated responsibility through my executive team, my senior management team, and my management team when they did those recruitment.
And do you agree that it was your responsibility to ensure that staff received adequate training, instruction and supervision?
Yes.
Did the TMO plan any system to ensure or check that staff did receive adequate instruction, training and supervision?
In the sense the system was the responsibility for each manager to assess their member of staff We had a training budget, we had a director of organisational development, and we had each year assessment of staff with training needs. And those training needs could vary depending on the role, and that was included in each budget.
You know, the last sentence, as I've read to you, there's the reference there to an in-company appointed health and safety professional responsible for providing advice on all health, safety and welfare matters. Who was that person when you drafted this policy in, or signed this policy in July 2010?
Janice Ray. And it could also be my HR director, in terms of actually there's a lot of stuff there that could actually fall into managing the welfare of your staff.
I see. And the HR director was?
At that time it was Lynette Pemberton.
That was Lynette Pemberton, was it? And then it changed, I think, after that.
Yeah, there was a few after, which I can't remember all the names.
Right.
But they were all professionally recruited.
Did the role of in-company appointed health and safety professional, at least that occupied by Janice Ray, include providing advice on fire safety matters?
Yes.
It did. And what about fire safety on capital projects like major refurbishments?
That would sit, in a sense, so Janice's role is that she would give advice to teams when asked, or if she needed to. But within capital teams, that was responsibility of the people employed to manage it. Also in terms of to recruit contractors who actually met with all health and safety legislation.
Right. Now, Janice Ray wasn't on the executive team, was she?
No.
Why was she not on the executive team at any stage?
So I had an executive team, senior manager, and Janice, well, you don't just put people on the executive team. So in terms of Janice, she was managed by the executive director. She came to executive, she came to board, she went to senior management team. She was someone in terms of had a wider role.
But she didn't attend senior management team meetings?
She did when she was required.
You say she did. Do you know why she wasn't part of the senior management team level, though?
While I was preparing for this, I thought she was. But I think when I remember back to discussions about the scope of her role, is in terms of she managed one person, it grew to two, whereas most of the senior managers had a wider portfolio. I don't think it didn't downgrade her role in my eyes or anybody that I spoke to.
Well, do you accept that had she been part of senior management, as opposed to reporting to senior management, she might have been able to influence the decisions that senior management was taking and the way they reported to the board? And indeed, at joint management meetings with RBKC, influenced the direction of travel there?
Janice, I don't agree with that. I think Janice was influential within the organisation and could influence. I think a senior management team would be stupid to know the advice of your health and safety manager.
Well, that may be, but there's a difference between advice and reporting on the one hand and being in the room, as it were, isn't there, making the actual decisions.
Again, I would have to see the context.
Now, let's look at the interaction between TMO and RBKC in terms of health and safety. I'd like to show you TMO 100374442 at page 38. This is an excerpt from a TMO Health and Safety Annual Report for 2009 to 2010, and it's dated July 2010. And at page 38 is rather in the middle of it. Rather at the beginning of it, but in the middle of the document. I'll just show you page 52 so that we can be clear together that it's signed by Janice Ray. There is her name at the foot of that page, as you can see. And if we go back to page 38, you'll see under part 2, section 2, which is health and safety relationship between TMO and RBKC, it says this, 2.1, the TMO is the managing agent for Kensington and Chelsea's council housing stock. The council retains ownership of the stock and, as such, retains some responsibilities for the health and safety of the residents and their homes. Therefore, for the purposes of the enforcing body, the health and safety executive, the responsibilities would be considered to be joint. And then under 2.2, for example, compliance with the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order 2005 is operationally delegated to the TMO. However, in the event of a breach of these regulations, the London Fire Brigade would consider the TMO and the Council to be jointly liable for the breach and would serve enforcement notices on or pursue prosecution against both. And then under 2.3, the Council monitors the TMO's health and safety performance in order to satisfy itself that we are complying with our statutory responsibilities, adhering to best practice and ensuring the best possible environment for the residents to live in and for our employees and contractors to work in. Specifically, the Council's Corporate Health and Safety Advisor and the Health and Safety Advisor from Housing, Health and Adult Social Care receive copies of the minutes from regular H&S committee meetings and also this annual report. Additionally, the TMO Health and Safety Advisor attends the Council's 6-weekly Health and Safety Main Coordinating Committee. Finally, the Council is notified promptly of any major incidents, accidents or significant near misses and is informed of progress on ongoing investigations. And then it goes on about meetings. Now, to be clear, I've read that to you at some length to refresh your memory of the document, but to be clear, compliance with the RRO, the 2005 legislation, was operationally delegated to the TMO. Yes, that's what it says.
Operationally.
Operationally. Does that mean that operationally the TMO was responsible for health and safety in the housing stock?
Yes.
Yes. But RBKC could still be liable to prosecution under the RRO. Is that how you understood it?
Yes.
Yes. So far as you understood it, is it right that RBKC shared the TMO's view that it was jointly responsible under the RRO and at risk of prosecution for its contravention?
Yes.
Yes. Now, when you became Chief Executive Officer at the TMO, can you remember whether you had an understanding of the role and the ambit of the role of the responsible person under Article 3 of the RRO?
Yes.
What was that understanding?
That as a responsible person, I was responsible to appoint competent people to carry out my health and safety, which is Janice, and to ensure safety. Sorry, it's not a great answer.
Did you ever discuss with Janice Ray, as the competent person appointed, you say, what the role of competent person was under the RRO itself?
I can't recall specifically that.
So when you use the word competent person, are you meaning it in the context of that expression as used in the legislation, or are you using it in a general sense?
I was using it in terms of the way it's expressed between responsible person and competent person.
You had an understanding at the time of the distinction between the two, did you?
Yeah.
Did you ever discuss with Janice Ray, coming back to the question, about what her role as competent person involved?
I can't recall specifically, sorry.
No. Do you accept that the TMO, as the responsible person, was required by the RRO, and in particular Article 11, to make arrangements and give effect to arrangements for effective planning, organisation, control, monitoring and review?
Yeah.
Yes. And also protective and preventative measures, yes?
Yes.
Does that mean, to your way of understanding it at the time, that the TMO had to put in place an arrangement or protocol, procedures, processes to manage the risk of fire in its stock?
Yes.
Yes. And do you agree that arrangement needed to set out in writing how it would be that the TMO would plan, organise, control, monitor and review preventative and protective fire safety measures? Yes?
Yes, I think.
Yes. Who was it in the TMO who was responsible for deciding that arrangement, designing that arrangement?
I would depend on Janice to do that. And I know from 2009 she worked on the fire risk strategy for the company, which covered a wide range of areas.
From 2009, do you say?
When she started working, it came into place in 2013, I think.
Yes.
And it's been
Indeed.
reviewed in 2016.
So you say she started working on the fire safety strategy, or fire risk strategy, as you call it, in 2009.
Yeah.
It took 4 years to come to fruition.
At the same time, we also addressed the whole things around fire risk assessments. So in those 4 years, we had agreed with the fire brigade, because I think previously, before I came, she was the one, like a lot of other organisations, carrying out the fire risk assessment since the regulation had changed in 2006. I think the fire brigade hadn't been happy with that, and therefore in 2009-10 we employed Carol Stokes to carry out the high risk. So between that, there was quite a lot of conversation between RBKC and the TMO to make the council and board aware of all these issues, and ultimately that's how we moved to having a fire consultant and carrying out the fire risk assessments across the high, medium and low blocks over the 3 years.
Specifically, I think, do you agree that the arrangement that we've just discussed, as required by the RRO, to cover all those aspects of it, was the fire risk strategy or fire safety strategy? And that was Janice Ray's role, was it?
Yeah.
Right. Do you accept that you were ultimately responsible for ensuring that such a document, which covered those matters, was in place?
Yes.
Yes. Do you know, or did you require Janice Ray, I think that's the person, to use any particular sources of guidance when developing the fire safety strategy?
Well, I think she would have, as far as I recall, because everybody was in the same position across the whole of England when it changed, trying to understand what was required. So I think there was quite a lot of consultation with the London Fire Brigade on the format. I think there's a best practice format, which I believe she used. Is it PAS? Sorry.
Well, there's PAS 2007, and then after 2012, PAS.
So I think
PAS 79 of 2007, and then PAS 79 of 2012.
So in terms of she developed that, I think she would have also gone to forums and in policy forums where people were doing the same thing. And then we used Carol Stokes, who to check and sign off with the fire brigade.
Just be a little bit more specific. Did you require or check, perhaps, that Janice Ray, when developing the fire safety strategy to cover the obligations of the responsible person under Article 11, was using PAS 79 in either the 2007 or 2012 editions? Did you check?
I'm not sure if I specifically checked that, but I'm sure we included it in our health and safety statement in that year. Not health and safety report that year.
Really, my question is, did you leave it to her to discover for herself what the guidance should be when developing that strategy,
Yes.
or did you give her any help?
I think she did it, and I was there if she required help.
Right. And did she come to you and ask for help, or did she?
She didn't come and ask.
No.
We'd probably discussed it over the time.
Let's look at the at PAS number 7, PAS 7, which is 2013. It's a BSI 6071, please. And this is entitled Fire Risk Management System Specification. Is this a document that you asked Janice Ray to use when developing the fire safety strategy, or guided her in the direction of?
No.
No. Are you familiar with this document at all?
No.
Right. Well, let's see how we go with it. Page 20, please. Paragraph 6.2.2.1. Under fire safety competence, it says this: the organisation shall employ or contract with people who are competent on the basis of education, training, skills and experience for the tasks assigned to them. Then if you cast your eye down to paragraph 6.3, which is at the bottom of the screen there, awareness. Persons doing work under the organisation's control shall be aware of A, the fire safety policy, B, their contribution to the effectiveness of the FRMS, including the benefits of improved fire safety performance, C, the implications of not conforming with the FRMS requirements, D, any risks to them arising from or in connection with the work they are intended to do. Were you aware at any time between 2009 and 2017 of any of the principles I've read to you from this page?
No.
No. Can we look at section 8 of PAS 7 2013 at page 25, please? I'm going to read a chunk of this to you. This is 8.3, Management Review. 8.3.1, Top Management shall review the organisation's FRMS, Fire Risk Management Strategy, at planned intervals to ensure its continuing suitability, adequacy and effectiveness. And then there are 2 notes underneath that. Note 1, reviews should include assessing opportunities for improvement and the need for changes to the management system, including the policy and objectives. Note 2, a model pro forma for a management review procedure is provided in Annex J. And then it goes on at 8.3.2. The management review shall include consideration of A, the status of actions from previous management reviews, B, changes in external and internal issues that are relevant to the FRMS, C, information on the fire safety performance, including trends in 1, non-conformities and corrective actions, 2, monitoring measurement results, 3, audit results, 4, interested party feedback, 5, evaluation of compliance with legal and other requirements, and then D, opportunities and recommendations for continual improvement. 8.3.3, the outputs of the management review shall include decisions related to A, continual improvement opportunities, B, improvement related to interested party requirements, C, resource needs to enable improvement to the FRMS and its processes, and D, any need for changes to the FRMS. And then there's another note. And then 8.3.4 relates to the maintenance of records from management reviews. Now, I've read that at length, I'm afraid, and because I don't know whether you're familiar with it, but I'm assuming you're not familiar with this.
Not that detail, no.
Or what about the principles contained in that?
I understand some of the principles.
Right. Now, according to this guidance, the TMO should have had, do you agree, a system in place at all times, and certainly from 2013 when PAS 7 was published, which allowed for a management review as opposed to an external review or audit of its fire risk management systems at planned intervals. Do you agree?
Yes.
Yes. Did the TMO have such a system in place?
I would say we did have a system in parts, probably not as laid out as that.
Right.
So in terms of fire risk assessments were carried out across the stock over the 3 years. The results were fed into the Health and Safety Committee, who reviewed them. If there were changes or improvements in terms of how we worked, that was built into our operational areas, and they were checked through audits, management checks, etc.
Well, yes, we'll come to that later. My question is, looking at 8.3.2, did you have a review by top management, including you, of the TMO's FRMS at planned intervals?
No.
No. So therefore it would follow, wouldn't it, that none of the considerations required by a management review at 8.3.2 were ever undertaken?
No, I think there were. I mean, we had improvements. So again, we brought in fire risk assessments across the 3 areas between 2009, 2012, which met the target we agreed with the fire brigade and RBKC. The outcome of those works were fed into the health and safety, and
well, if there was no top management review of the organisation's FRMS at planned intervals, then it would follow, wouldn't it, that the management review, which is identified at 8.3.2, never occurred?
Agreed.
Yeah. And therefore, under 8.3.2.c, there was never a management review by top management at planned intervals of any of the matters in A through to D in that subsection.
I think there would have been reviews, but not as specifically laid out as that.
Right. And there was no internal audit of fire safety performance or fire safety management itself, was there?
There was internal audit of health and safety, which included fire safety, but I don't think specifically over time it was pulled out as an individual one.
Right. And the internal audit I'm asking you about is TMO's internal audit by TMO's own management. Did that occur? I don't think we see any evidence of that.
Right.
We know that there were a number of external audits, but only one of those specifically addressed the TMO's fire risk management system, and that was the Salvas audit in 2009.
Right.
Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Yes. We'll come back to that shortly. Can I go then to the topic of corporate risk? The TMO, is it right that the TMO as an organisation was familiar with the concept of risk or corporate risk?
Yes.
It's a broad question, but you agree. And it had a corporate risk map, didn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. I think we can look at an example of this from February 2017, so quite late on. And this is at TMO 100499906. It's not a particularly easy document to see. We'll need to blow it up. But if we look at risk number 1, and if you can't read it, Mr. Black, I apologise, and I'll
I think I can.
read it to you.
All right.
But risk number 1 is failure to comply with statute and regulation, procurement legislation, data protection, equality and diversity, financial and internal controls, safeguarding, probity, bribery and fraud. Now, do you agree that it isn't any surprise that the TMO recognised failure to comply with statute and regulation as a risk?
Yes.
Yes. And if we look at the risk identified and explanation column, which is the fourth one along, it's in the grey band, it says, poor organisational governance leads to failings in the areas of substantial or sustained breach of statutory or regulatory obligations, failure to appoint the right contractors, limits ability to deliver programmes, risk of contractor challenge with financial penalties, risk of under-recovery of leaseholder service charges, legal challenges can result from poor financial controls and poor safeguarding issues, reputational damage can arise from mismanagement of any of these issues. Now, the first point there, for poor organisational governance leads to substantial or sustained breach of statutory or regulatory obligations. You would accept that that was a risk?
Yes.
Yes. And the reverse could be true too. The breach of statutory or regulatory obligations may arise through poor organisational governance?
Yes.
Yes. The second point there, failure to appoint the right contractors. Presumably you were aware of the need to control that as a risk? Yes?
Yes.
How did the TMO ensure that it did appoint the right contractors when it came to fire safety specifically?
Are you mean individual parts that cover fire safety? So in principle, contractors we recruited through formal processes, usually supported by consultants, to make sure they're meeting their legal obligations. So in terms of like a repairs company or a capital investment company. So when we did those procurements, they would go through a process where those aspects which should be picked up by the process and the consultants managing it to make sure they're appropriate company for the company.
And did that process include specifically any examination of the contractor's experience, skill, expertise or any training in areas of fire safety?
I would have thought so.
But you don't know?
Not off the top of my head.
No. Looking at risk number 5, if we can just scroll down, please. Failure of health and safety in relation to services that we deliver to residents, staff in the work environment and contractors in the delivery of works. Would you agree that that includes fire safety as a subset?
Yes.
Yes. And under the column risk identified and explanation, the fourth one along, if we can just go to that, you can see that it says serious injury or death of a resident, staff member, contractor, customer, or member of the public, potential prosecution by health and safety executive, excluding terrorist activity. And to put it bluntly, the consequences of a failure to manage health and safety could be death.
Yes.
Yeah. If you look under the column headed existing control measures, mitigation or elimination, across the screen, it says health and safety committee meetings every 2 months involving ET and SMT members where fire risk assessments, FRAs, and associated actions, water quality and asbestos reviews are monitored, resulting actions are monitored and audited, internal audit also monitor and report, emergency planning tested in real event has been reviewed as a consequence. So monitoring of FRAs, is this right? Monitoring of FRAs and associated actions was considered to be the existing control measure for fire safety?
Yes.
Yes. And the resulting actions to be monitored, presumably monitored by the executive team, the senior management team, and the Health and Safety Committee.
Yeah.
And audited. Who was to carry out that auditing?
Well, there was our internal auditors who carried out health and safety audits.
And
there would also be the management team checking that they're doing what they're required to do.
when it says internal audit, who was intended to conduct that as part of your mitigation measures?
Well, I think that would be our internal audit, which was RBKC, who carried out internal audits for us.
I see. So you're saying that the RBKC audits were internal for the purposes of this document?
Yes, they were internal audits.
Well, they weren't internal to TMO as an arm's length organisation, were they?
I don't understand. So we employed RBKC audit to carry out internal audits on our company.
Right. There may be a play on words on the word internal here, but you regarded RBKC as your internal auditor for this purpose. Is that right?
They were our appoint. So we had a management agreement with RBKC. So we paid RBKC a yearly fee from our management fee for RBKC to carry out all our internal audits and some audits that crossed over into the HRA because that was still with responsibility sat with RBKC.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Do I take it from that there was no TMO internal audit of this risk? In other words, control measures for fire safety.
That would be the manager's job in the teams because they're managing that risk. So they would be managing their responsibility either with the contractors to make sure they're doing it.
But within the TMO, there was no audit or even peer review of that activity.
Well, there'd probably be review, but we didn't have another audit team sitting within the company.
Now, under the residual risk column, you can see it's the next column but one along after the word medium. It says actions arising out of assessments and inspections not done in a timely manner. So can we take it from that that one of the residual risks was timing?
Yes.
In other words, minimising delay.
Yes. As fast
now,
as possible.
The person with responsibility for this risk, as if you look across beyond the colours, green, red, green, is DFS. Now, that's the Director of, is this right? Director of Financial Services?
Yeah, that'd be Barbara Matthews.
Yes, and because this is 2017, this document. That was Barbara Matthews. Was there an earlier corporate risk map like this document, earlier than February 2017?
I'm not sure. I think we had risk maps before.
Right. Can we assume, just going back to some earlier topics, that neither you nor any TMO managers were ever trained in risk management, or is that wrong?
That's wrong.
Were you trained in risk management?
Yeah, we had a board, exec and SMT training on risk management by external consultants. It started off with the board at the highest level, so there was an away day, or it might have been part of a workshop. So we had external consultants come in and design it because it was looking at what sort of company we were. I can't remember the name of the company. It was led by Janet Seward.
I see, yes, and she's given us a witness statement on that subject. And there was a workshop, I think, as she says, run by the TMO's insurers, Zurich, in March 2017.
Yeah.
Yes. Very well. We can look at her statement for that. That's TMO 50896. Now, looking at how the TMO board was briefed about health and safety, and particularly fire safety, you provided reports to the board, didn't you, at each meeting where significant fire safety issues would be included?
Yeah.
Yeah. And how would you determine whether a fire safety issue should be reported up to the board?
I mean, my chief exec report was a bit like a catch-all. If there was so in terms of the board, when the company secretary agreed the agenda with the board, they were formal papers. In a sense, the chief exec report almost was to encourage other things to come up as well. And staff were encouraged across the business to contribute it to keep the board informed. So in terms of how, if there was any health and safety issue, it would be Barbara and Janice to let us know, and we would include those aspects in the report. If it was a bigger thing, then it would become a formal report.
Right. So when you say if there was any health and safety issue, it would be Barbara and Janice to let us know. Does that mean that you, as Chief Executive Officer, were entirely reliant on their judgment as to whether a fire safety or fire safety management question should be presented to the board or not?
Yeah.
I see. We know that there was an annual health and safety report which went to the board. Am I right in thinking that the contents of that report were left entirely to Janice Ray and Anthony Parks and then later Barbara Matthews?
Yes, unless there was other, I mean, because that covered a whole load of things across the company. So other people would contribute it, but Barbara and Janice would be the ones that would pull it together to try to ensure we covered everything.
And would it be right that board members could raise questions about fire safety under any other business at board meetings?
Yes.
If they thought it was necessary?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Chairman, with some regret, I've come to a new topic, and it's shortly before 11:15. I'm happy to spend a couple of minutes getting into it, or we could break now.
Is this going to be a lengthy topic?
Yes, it is. It's not a topic I can finish before a break.
All right. Well, perhaps we'll take the break slightly early in that case, save disrupting your line of questioning.
It would do. If we took a break, it would.
Yes. Well, Mr. Black, we have a break during each session. We normally don't have it quite as early as this, but we'll take it now. We'll stop now and return at 11:30, please.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask you on this occasion and every other occasion when you leave the room, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it while you're away from the room.
Okay.
All right? Thank you very much. Would you like to go with the usher then, please? All right, 11:30 then, please. Would you ask Mr. Black to come back in, please? All right, Mr. Black.
Yes,
you-
I'll just pour some water if that's
Yeah, of course, no rush. All right, ready to carry on?
Yeah.
Yes. Mr. Black, arising out of the exchanges we had just before the break, was there at any time during your tenure as CEO a process in place for approval of documents such as the fire safety strategy by the board?
Yes, I think so.
What was that process?
The policy would have been developed by the policy development team, or in case of fire safety one, it would have been Janice, and she would have also run it by them. It would have then gone through probably senior management team, executive, and to the board.
Right. And is that, as part of that process, did the board bring independent consideration to the document?
Yes, I mean,
How did it go about doing that?
so is it useful if I tell you a little bit about the board, because we haven't discussed that?
Well, we'll come to it in due course, but please do tell us.
So the board was made up of 15. There was 8 residents who were board members and elected. The TMO board itself appointed 3 independents, and before I arrived, the council appointed 4 council appointees, but they changed that quite quickly after I joined to 2 independents and 2 councillors, the political deal was a Labour and a Conservative. So basically I had 5 independents on the board. A 15-hour board is quite big in terms of good practice. Good practice was on average 12, but generally over years it's got down to 9. But because it was a TMO, that's its constitution. So therefore you had independent voices both from the residents and the independents, but the independents would challenge you, as is their role, if they required.
Now, I want to ask you about the TMO fire safety strategy. Before I do that, I want to look at a document which was prepared by Salvus for the TMO in September 2009. Now, you remember, I think, that Salvus were the fire risk assessors instructed by the TMO in that year.
Yes.
Yes. And the document itself is at SAL 6013, please. This is a document called the Fire Risk Assessment for Fire Safety Policy and Procedures conducted on behalf of the TMO by Salvus. The date is on, let's go to the date, page 5, please, top right-hand corner, 22nd of September 2009. You see that?
Yes.
Now, were you aware at the time that this document was produced that it had been produced?
Can you confirm the date of it again?
22nd of September 2009, so about 4 months after your arrival.
I think it was commissioned by Liam, who was the Property Services Director at that time.
Liam who, please?
Sorry, I can't remember his surname, but he was the
Right.
Property Services Director. I apologise.
Right.
I don't remember. I don't know if it was commissioned before I joined, and I've been preparing for this. I've been trying to understand what kicked it off. Sort of
Right.
thing.
You don't know?
I think it was probably around the fire risk assessment issues that I think the TMO was having with the fire brigade before I came. Because I think up until then, Janice was doing the fire risk assessments with her team, and I think the fire brigade were pushing that actually it wasn't going fast enough and they needed to do it with a consultant in a sense. And I think that was an issue happening across the country, or certainly in London, that trying to get someone to help you do it in terms of the skills.
Now, did you see this document at the time it was produced, or later?
I have really tried to think. I just can't remember at the time when it came to me. So, and I've been trying to find it when we were looking through where it went to. So, but
Right.
I can't recall it directly. Sorry.
Do you recall seeing this document at any time during your tenure as CEO of the TMO?
I must have done.
You can't remember when?
I can't. The trouble is, I've really racked. But again, within the context although I'm 4 months into my job, there has been and I don't know whether you'll speak about it later, so I don't know if this is the appropriate time. As a new chief exec, I faced quite a challenge on terms of, yes, I was responsible, I'm the responsible person, but I was also responsible for a board and a company that wasn't actually operating properly. And my whole exec team left probably within that 4-month period as well.
Now let's look at the first two paragraphs of the introduction on page 2 of this document. It says, this is fire risk assessment management. I'm so sorry. This fire risk assessment management report has been completed at the request of Russell Thompson, Head of Asset Strategy and Investment of Tenant Management Organisation, TMO, of the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. Just pausing there, did you know Russell Thompson?
Yeah, so that clarified. I thought it was Russell.
Right.
The previous person left, and Russell was a consultant that we had to bring in at short notice.
And it goes on to say, this management report reflects information gathered on the fire safety management systems of the TMO in respect of its property portfolio as per contract agreement dated 2nd September 2009. Now, we'll come back to this document in due course, but I just want to ask you about one of the issues highlighted by Salvus within it. If you go to page 5, please, we go to the hazard column on that page under section 1.1, and that says lack of a TMO fire safety policy statement. You see that? And then if you go across to the 4th column, in italics, it says there does not appear to be an overall TMO fire safety policy statement setting out the organisation's strategic fire safety objectives, including reference to achieving full compliance with the requirements of the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order 2005, wherever it applies to premises managed and or occupied by the TMO and which is formally endorsed by the Chief Executive on behalf of the TMO. And then if you look in the hazard column under 1.2, lack of inadequate TMO policy and arrangements. And then in the 4th column in italics it says, there does not appear to be adequate policy and supporting arrangements to explain how TMO will meet the objectives set out in any future strategic policy statement to ensure suitable and sufficient fire safety is maintained at all times throughout the TMO's property portfolio. There was no specific policy and arrangements for fire risk assessment, appointing fire safety assistants, fire prevention, general fire precautions, use of dangerous substances, maintenance, training and cooperation and coordination, all of which are required by law. Now, did you know when you arrived or shortly after you arrived that there was no TMO fire safety policy statement in existence?
No.
You didn't know that. Did you know that as of September 2009, 4 months on?
Probably not.
Did you know that at any time?
As we worked to develop one, yes.
Well, you worked to develop. When did you first discover that there was no TMO fire safety policy statement and inadequate TMO policy and arrangements as described in this report?
I'm trying to remember, sorry. I can't bring it down to specific data.
I mean, do I take it that not only can you not recall the time when you saw this document, but you also can't recall any impression that you would have gained from reading it?
I think
right?
I think the impression I got, because in a sense this was the catalyst for moving. Sorry. So this is a catalyst for creating quite a lot of work in terms of actually moving the structure forward. So in terms of bringing in bringing in Salvus from this, they did our high-risk properties and carried out the fire risk assessments, and then Carol Stokes was employed to carry that on. So it set off a huge piece of work. I think it was around 650 we had to produce over the 3 years. So that was, in a sense, the key piece of work that we took away from this.
I understand that. That's FRAs, but this is directing you to something higher, isn't it? Which is a TMO fire safety policy statement and adequate TMO policy and arrangements. My question, just to repeat it, is: do you remember a time when you gained an impression that those two facets of fire safety policy and fire safety arrangements were not in place?
I can't remember. in the sense of the sort of sat with Lynette in terms of helping me understand and take it forward.
Right. I mean, you say you must have seen this document at some point. Do you actually recall ever reading it?
As I said, as I've looked through all these documents, and I've recognised that if you can't remember it, then I can't say I can. If I'd seen it, I'm sure I would, because I understand how important it is and what it's set off for the company in terms of compliance with RRO. But I can't remember it because at that time I was under gigantic pressure on other aspects of the company that's not diluting health and safety or fire safety. But in a sense, as chief exec, I was recruited on a basis to do something, and then most of the promises that were made to evaporated. So I had to prioritise and depend on my team who were in place, which was Lynette and Janice Ray.
Did either of them, to the best of your recollection, ever put this on your desk in front of you and say, read this?
I can't remember that.
Can we look and see what you say about a fire safety strategy in your witness statement, please? Page 17, paragraph 87. You say there, TMO had a specific fire strategy in place which was reviewed and updated during its existence. Now, you say reviewed and updated during its existence. When were you first aware that a fire safety strategy for the TMO existed?
When it was 2013, well, it was before 2013, because Janice said we'd had chats about it and she was working on it as well as doing all the FRA stuff. And then we got it signed off, and then I think it was coming up for a review in 2016.
You say that it was reviewed and updated during its existence. How often was it reviewed and updated?
I can't recall, sorry.
Well, let's look and see how we go with the documents. TMO 00870171, please. This is a copy of a document headed TMO Fire Safety Policy. And if you go down to page 5, please, at the bottom of the page, I think we probably need page 4, in fact, rather than 5. You'll see your name and the date, December 2009. Do you remember what the circumstances were in which you put your name to this document?
Can you just show me the top of the document
Yes, of course,
again?
page
Sorry.
1, please.
Right. So in terms of I put my name to it because in the sense it had been developed in process, and as the responsible person, I would be signing it.
Yes, but can you give us a bit more? Why was this document produced for you in or by December 2009?
Because it'd be part of the work that we've probably done with Salvus. Sorry, again, just for confirm, I just need to check if I'm understanding it's the...
Well, take your time. Have a look at the first 3 sub-paragraphs under...
Can you confirm how many pages it is, just for my...
Yes, it's 5 pages in all, but ends at the bottom of page 4, and there's a further page.
Okay.
Do you know why this document was produced for you in or before December 2009?
Well, I think it was part of a position statement, probably flowing out from the Salvus report, that could be organisationally, the organisation could start sort of putting these bits of paper and policies in place and take it to the board. I suppose from my perspective, I wasn't sure what my board knew about these issues as well when I came, because I was dealing with so many things. So there was a backlog of policy and procedures that hadn't been developed over the previous years. So in sense of there was probably why some things took so long. But as we got better, we developed them and reviewed them more often.
Yes, I mean, what you say is logical, but do you actually remember that?
Yes, I remember this.
Right.
I just couldn't, I thought I was looking at another paper, sorry.
Right. Do you remember reading this strategy before you signed it?
Yes.
You did. Let's go back to the Salvus management report then, please. SAL 6013 at page 5 again. And I've shown you this, paragraph 1.2, second italicised paragraph that does not appear to be adequate policy. And then if you look at the second italicised paragraph, there was no specific policy and arrangements for fire risk assessment, etc. I've read that out to you already. Take it from me that the December 2009 fire safety strategy that you signed at that time does not address any of those specific policies or arrangements that you see in the second italicised paragraph under section 1.2 of the Salvers report. Can you account for why it doesn't?
No.
Do you know why you signed off on such a document when it did not comply in those respects?
I signed off on it probably because it was presented to by my health and safety person who went through it with me, and therefore I thought it had.
Who was that?
It would have been Janice Ray.
Did Janice Ray not sit down with you and the Salvers report and make sure that you understood, or make sure that you looked across to check that what you were signing complied with or carried into effect the recommendations in the Salvers report?
I take that point, again, trying to remember the context of it. There was a lot of things going on, and in a sense I was relying on Janet to do that so that I could actually sign it off and have it in place. I think there was an urgency, and I can't sort of feel comfortable with it, but it's partly just what I found myself in.
I understand
the situation.
I mean, does it come to this, that you relied on Janice Ray to make sure that the document she put in front of you corresponded with the and took into effect the recommendations contained in the Salvers report?
Yes.
Yes. Now, can we turn to the TMO Fire Safety Strategy of November 2013, signed by Janice Ray, TMO 008305998, please. This document is headed TMO Fire Safety Strategy. Do you remember seeing this document at the time?
Yes.
November 2013,
yes.
You do. Do you agree that the intention behind this fire safety strategy was for it to apply to all buildings, at least those buildings to which the RRO applied, in the TMO's stock?
Yes.
Yeah. Can we look at a document which describes that stock? This is TMO 008735596. This is the TMO's asset management strategy for the years 2014 to 2019. Are you familiar with this document?
Yes.
You are. It looks from various parts of it that it's a draft.
Sorry, I thought it was another one. I just recognised the dates there.
Well,
it would have been produced, I say, before the... No, sorry. Yes, I am aware of it. Apologies.
Right. It looks as it's a draft because there are various square brackets in it. Do you know whether it was ever finalised?
It would have been, yes, because it informed quite a lot of other work that was done by the team.
Very well. Let's go to page 5 in it, please, and look at the third paragraph down from the top middle of your screen. This strategy covers the council's rented housing stock, general needs and sheltered, of just under 7,000 homes, more than 2,500 leasehold properties where the council's repairing liabilities are more limited and costs recharged to owners, and more than 500 garages. It also supports the management of more than 250 commercial sites. Now, the fire safety strategy had to be sufficiently robust, didn't it, to enable compliance with the RRO across that whole portfolio?
Yes.
Yes. And if let's then look back at the fire safety strategy from November 2013, at TMO 008305998, and let's look together at section 1.4 under the introduction. It says there, this strategy document enables us to outline the measures we have put in place, not just to comply with fire safety legislation, but more importantly, to minimise the risk of fire throughout the housing stock. Specifically, we are committed to reducing the risk of an outbreak of fire and also the risk of a fire spreading within a building, but also spreading from one building to another. Is it right that the intention behind this document was that it would be the overarching strategy which would outline how the TMO approached fire safety across its stock?
Yes.
Yes. And Janice Ray, as we can see, we know, because she's told us, was responsible for writing it.
Yes.
Yeah. And was that overseen by anybody, such as Anthony Parks, or
yes,
perhaps it was?
It should have been.
Right. And were you supposed to check it and sign it off?
In the sense I expected Anthony would work with Janice, and then when it would come to exec, that it's agreed that, this final document, we'd review it and sign it off.
Did you check it and sign it off? Do you remember?
I'm sure I signed it off, yeah.
Right. And when you signed it off, were you given any explanation of it by Janice Ray or Anthony Parks, for
I
that
think
matter?
so, yes.
Right. Do you remember that? Or
Yes.
you do? What did they tell you?
They finished it after a very long time. They went, the format, they would go through it at the meeting, and people would look at it page by page.
You say they finished it after a very long time. You are right about that if you are referring to the period between September 2009 and November 2013, a period of over 4 years. Can you account for why it took them so long?
No, I've been trying to think about it. I mean, reality is so this is one part of a thing she was doing, but at the same time we'd launched the whole fire risk assessments across our 650 blocks. So there was the work she was doing with Carl Stokes had been, Savills, who were doing the first part, the high risk, and then the work on the go with them coming through every now and then. So I think it's just one of those things that she felt personally she wanted to do. It covers a lot of area. She'd have to work with different teams within the TMO to pull it all together.
Do you remember whether the board signed off on this document?
I don't remember a specific board, but I would have thought they would have, yes.
Why would you think that they would have? Or why do you think?
Because generally the policies went to the board,
right,
as far as I recall.
So would there a minute of a board meeting at which this document is approved?
I would think so.
Right. I'm not sure that we see one, but we will check. But can you remember whether it was presented to the board?
I can't remember. At that time, there were so many papers going to board to try to do catch-up, so I can't remember everyone. Apologies.
Right. Let's look at another aspect of fire risk management, and that's the emergency plan. Now, before we look at the document itself, can we go back to the Salvos review of 2009, September 2009, at SAL 6013? This time, page 11, heading number 9, emergency procedures and evacuation plans. And if you look at 9.1, it says lack of / inadequate emergency plans, and then under existing control measures in place, it says it is noted from a state staff quick reference handbook that there is a generic document emergency plan. This is in italics. This was not available for review at the time of the assessment, and therefore it could not be confirmed that it is in accord with recommendations as set out in the HM Government Guidance Section 7.2. Just pausing there, that's the sleeping guide.
Right.
TMO staff who receive fire safety training are trained to implement local firefighting actions using portable fire extinguishers where they are present at the time and they consider it is safe to do so. Now, as far as you are aware, were there any building-specific emergency plans used by the TMO?
Not off the top of my head in terms of specific buildings, because there were so many buildings.
Right. I mean, either in September 2009 or at any time thereafter?
I can't confirm so.
Right. Now, if you look at the column headed risk category with controls, which is the second one from the right on the screen, it says high, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And if we skip to the action plan at page 18, which is the document which sits behind the risk assessment within the same overall document, under this risk, 9.1, it says, it is strongly recommended that TMO seek confirmation that all emergency plans are in accord with recommendations as set out in the HM Government Guidance Section 7.2, and where found not to be so, that adjustments are made as necessary to fully comply with this guidance. Now, leaving aside the slightly wonky grammar there, were you aware at any time of this recommendation?
I can't recall it specifically.
Right. You agree? Do you agree with me, just looking at it, that Salvos, at least at this time, are expressing a clear concern that the TMO's plans might not comply with that guidance?
In terms of emergency plan, can you confirm what the, again, I'm just trying to remember the thing, is it an emergency plan for each specific block they're talking about here?
Well, if you look back at the original recommendation on the first page, the answer to your question, which I will happily answer, is yes.
So again, I don't believe we had individual emergency plan for each block, because in principle we adopted the stay put strategy. Therefore, actually, in principle, people stay put. You don't have an emergency plan to get it out, because the fire brigade will come along, put the fire out, or actually evacuate the building.
Well, let me try and see if we can get this a slightly different way. You say you didn't have emergency plans for each block because you had a stay put strategy.
I believe so. That's what I think at this moment.
Right, let's just take this in stages. First, to be fair to you, I should show you paragraph 7, section 7.2 of the sleeping guide. This is at RBK 3036722, and we need to go to page 112 in that document to look at section 7.2. It's on the right-hand side of your screen under the heading in blue, emergency plans. Emergency plan and contingency plans. Your emergency plan should be appropriate to your premises and could include, and then it's a long bullet point list which goes on down to the bottom of the page, and I won't read them all out to you. Yeah. But you can see them there if you cast your eye down them.
Yeah, I can see that.
Were you familiar with this guidance? It dates from 2006.
I've heard about it, sorry. So I think there's a few pieces of the guidance. I mean, again, when I look at this, most of our stock was general needs. There would be no, if it's during the most of the time, there's no staff based there unless it's sheltered housing, and even that changed because actually we had less residential caretakers or caretakers or wardens in sheltered housing. And again, the principle is, again, from my perspective, was that the overall state put policy, unless you're dealing with people, a scheme that's got more high needs and support in it.
But it doesn't say that, does it? I mean, just looking at what's on your screen, it doesn't say you don't need emergency plans where you've got a stay put.
So I suppose from my experience of working in housing in 30 years, the housing associations or the registered providers wouldn't have had emergency plans per block across their whole stock.
Right.
So therefore, I think that's important to say that that's my experience. It's not just the TMO's experience.
Right. So your experience, is this right, is that section 7.2 was, as a matter of practice, in your business, never complied with?
In terms of where I worked before and knowing other organisations that colleagues, I would, unless it's a sheltered housing or a registered care home. So in Circle 33, I had care homes with people with severe disabilities and other support needs where we had 24-hour staff. Those schemes would have specific emergency plans because of the needs of the residents were completely fundamentally different from general needs.
I just wonder if we're confusing emergency plans and evacuation plans here, because I think you mentioned earlier the instructions in response to a fire were stay put.
Yes.
So it might be said the emergency plan is stay put.
I think that's very helpful clarification for me, Chair.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm not sure it's, with great respect, entirely correct. Let's look at this. Emergency plans, and we will have to read the bullet points. Your emergency plan should be appropriate to your premises. Right, first of all, do you agree that the text says it's building specific?
Yes.
Yes, and could include, and I note the word could as opposed to must or should, and then there's a long bullet point. How people will be warned if there's a fire. Well, that doesn't change, regardless of whether there's a stay put, does it?
Well, how people are warned in a stay put, as far as I can remember, the mass majority of general needs homes do not have an alarm system. Again, in the homes where I manage, which had support issues, and that could vary from homelessness and hostels which I worked in, up to high-risk resident care homes, they all had fire alarms built into them, strong links with the emergency services because of the needs of the people. Everywhere I've worked in terms of general needs, and that's across 3 or 4 5 organisation, they wouldn't have had the majority of this in place. It's about stay put, be rescued.
And that was your experience, was it?
That was my experience. Not just my own working experience, but across the sector.
But do you accept that on its face, this is a long list of things that a building-specific emergency plan could include, including, if you look at the 4th bullet point down, how the evacuation of the premises should be carried out.
So again, in stay put...
Well, let me just come to the question, please. First, were you aware that the general guidance under 7.2 was as we see?
I don't think I would be aware specifically.
Thank you. Secondly, were you aware in September 2009 or thereafter that Salvus had picked up non-compliance by the TMO with Section 7.2 as a criticism and a recommendation that compliance should be achieved?
So what I would say about that is there should have been a challenge back to Salvus whether that's appropriate for the house and stock that we were managing.
Well, there wasn't, was there?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
No. Thirdly, do you agree that there's nothing in either the heading or this long list which says that none of these apply where you have a stay-put policy? In other words, a blanket exclusion for the application of this provision of this guidance to a building where stay-put is the policy?
I think that's partly the confusion in some of the legislation. It's not always clear of what it's covering in terms it's intended. And how it conflicts with other parts. So there's a lot here about stay put, where in terms of general needs, where it wouldn't be appropriate.
As a matter of fact, do you recall whether the TMO took a decision not to carry Salvus's recommendation to comply with Section 7.2 into effect because you regarded it as inappropriate for your building stock?
So I can't recall specifically that point. What I'd say, though, is that having worked through this with you, is that it would seem that it would be inappropriate for the mass majority of general needs property.
As a general proposition, that is what you say. My question is, as a matter of fact, was any decision made in or after September 2009 that given the profile of TMO's stock, Section 7.2 didn't apply and Salvus's recommendation need not be carried into effect? Was a decision made?
I think there would have been a decision made in terms of actually if you stick with the stay put policy, in sense you don't do the mass majority of this. But I can't, so I have to say I can't confirm round about that time there was a specific discussion or decision.
Right. And my question is, was there a decision taken on the basis that you've identified, or was the recommendation simply ignored? That's what I'm trying to get.
Well, I suppose it's a recommendation. If it was ignored because it wasn't appropriate for a stock, then I wouldn't say ignored. It just wasn't.
At any event, do you agree that no plan was put in place to comply or attempt to comply with paragraph 7.2 of the sleeping guide?
I think so, unless Janice Ray has said something contrary to me.
Now, let's go back then to page 11 of this document. I'm so sorry, that is not the right document. I need to go back to the fire risk, management report, SAL 6013, page 11. If we go back to that, you can see that under 9.2, lack of stroke inadequate liaison with fire and rescue service, it does not appear that there is adequate liaison with the fire and rescue service in regard to pre-planning for potential fire scenarios or in agreeing appropriate fire safety standards for adoption by the TMO from the findings of fire risk assessments. And if you look at the action for 9.2 on page 18, this is in the action plan part of the document. Under 9.2 it says there, it's recommended that the TMO seek adequate liaison with the fire and rescue service in regard to pre-planning for potential fire scenarios in TMO managed properties and agree how relevant information may be provided between parties in an effective manner in an emergency. Also BS 9999 Annex M for additional advice. TMO should determine a set of fire safety standards for the organisation to move towards the future moved towards in the future. As part of a programme of improvements, such standards should be in accord with priorities based upon the findings of the fire risk assessments and current best guidance. Ideally, approval of the Fire and Rescue Service should be sought for these internal TMO standards. Now, it's clear from that, you agree that a recommendation for Liaison and Fire Rescue Services to plan for fire emergencies was made?
Yes.
Yeah. And that was with the aim of agreeing how relevant information would be provided to the LFB, in this case, in the event of an emergency.
Yes.
Yes. Was that ever done?
Yeah, I think Janice had, again, from where I came in, my recollection with Janice is she had regular meetings with the LFB. Certainly when we were starting to do these fire risk assessments for the first time, because there's lots of consultation to make sure they're right, which I think is normal within these procedures. And hopefully, so I've always felt that Janice has had appropriate relationships with the fire brigade in terms of timing, sharing information when required.
Did you ever monitor that or supervise that in your role as CEO?
She kept me informed verbally and updated. There was a consistent thing when I'd asked that she had regular meetings bi-monthly, I think it was, if I can recall, with the fire brigade.
Looking at the bottom of page 18, you can see 9.3. It is strongly recommended that TMO consider development of formal procedures to deal effectively with fire safety issues associated with disabled or vulnerable tenants and leaseholders, and also any employees. This should include a range of options, from relocation in severe cases with or without potential property adaptations and fixed fire suppression systems, to the provision of specific personal emergency evacuation plans in those less serious cases. See also recommendations in HM government guidance and building regulations approved document M. Now, we can see from that that's a red item, isn't it? So that's high risk, yes?
Yes.
Yes. And you can see the part that says formal procedures to deal effectively with fire safety issues associated with disabled or vulnerable tenants, leaseholders and employees. Was that done in the context of an emergency plan?
No. Not for, as far as I can recall, there, as I said, I don't think there was individual emergency plans per block. We would have information on our systems, but again, I think in the general, throughout this, it is about if it wasn't within a specific scheme that was supporting people with those needs, it was deemed that it was stay put.
Now, let's look at a document called Emergency Plan, at TMO 100-13898. We think that this was the last known version of this document before the fire on the 14th of June 2017, but please correct us if we're wrong about that. If we go to the third page, we can see that this is an updated version as at February 2016,
Yep.
which was the revision or further revision of a document which began its life in August 2004. Now, you may recall, Mr. Black, that you and I looked at this document together when you gave evidence in phase 1 of this inquiry in September 2018.
I do.
Day 74, page 146. And this document, it obviously is headed the TMO's emergency plan. I'm assuming from your evidence that you've just given us about section 7.2 of the sleeping guide, that this was not a document intended to satisfy the guidance in that document.
I'm afraid I'd need to see a little bit of it.
Yes, of course. Let's continue down to look at perhaps the index might help you.
Yeah, that would be helpful, thank you.
Okay, page 5. And the way this document is laid out is that it has essentially two parts: pages 1 to 26, and then the property details under part 2 from page 27 onwards.
Yes.
You see that?
I recognise it now.
Yes.
Thank you.
To just on that, and we could take a bit more time and go through it to refresh your memory if you like. But do I take it from the evidence you've given this morning already that this document was not a document intended to satisfy the guidance under section 7.2 of the sleeping guide?
I would say based on what I've said so far, but I can't remember the details at the moment, sorry.
All right. But do you know whether this plan was ever intended to satisfy TMO's regulatory obligations under the RRO more broadly?
Yes, I think it would have
You
been.
think it would have been, but do you remember whether it was designed for that purpose?
Yes.
You do. And the date of origin may be a clue, 2004, whereas the RRO is dated 2005.
Well, I wasn't there 2004, and
No.
it hadn't been reviewed for 9 years, or 5 years by the time I came. So,
But let's look at the wording on page 1, which is the internal numbering, page 13 of the document on your screen, and it says this, Part 1, KCTMA Emergency Planning Introduction, and then if you look under the heading KCTMA Emergency Plan, the third paragraph down after the quotations relating to the responsibility of the TMO in a major incident, and we've got definitions of major incident there. It says the plan is primarily for managing local KCTMO emergencies on, within or surrounding our properties and estates, one which can be managed within the resources available to the TMO. However, this plan can also be used for large-scale major events which would overwhelm the KCTMO's ability to manage on its own and which would involve the RBKC Council resources, the difference being the scale of the emergency and the number of people affected by it. You see that?
yes.
Now, on the next page, page 14, we can see that it deals with vulnerable residents there. And it says information on numbers of known vulnerable residents are included on the block/property details which form part of this plan. Now, we'll look at the block details shortly, but before I get there, it's clear that this document recognises the need for information on the numbers of known vulnerable residents, at the very least, if not necessarily the detail of their individual vulnerabilities. Yes?
So I think yes, and
Yes.
in the sense that would be collected so before 2008 the Audit Commission required us to collect information which was sometimes not so much, and then we've carried on, and the idea was to have it on the system to do this.
Now, if you go to page 34, there's a specific checklist for fire there. Do you see that? Checklist fire. And there's a question and an action there. And there are 12 questions, if you look down your screen, with potential answers, yes?
Yeah.
And if we look at the block-specific page for Grenfell, this is at page 134, internal 146 in the document, page 146 on the screen, you can see. In fact, I think we want 145 for the start of it. Grenfell Tower, Lancaster West. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Number of dwellings, 120. And vulnerable residents are numbered at 8 to 12 there. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, you'll recall, perhaps you won't, but in the Phase 1 report at paragraph 30.93, the chairman concluded that the emergency plan was obsolete and had been so for many years. So that's the conclusion of this inquiry. My question today for you is, after all the disclosure that you've seen at part 2, phase 2, is how come?
How come it's obsolete?
Yes. How come it had become so obsolete, 15 years out of date?
Well, again, I think we've been through this. Reality is that information should have been updated by staff. And the whole thing I've suffered throughout my career working with people is the ability to forget to fill in the paperwork. So I think there's three, I think we discussed this, where there's a lot of appendices behind here for each block. And in a sense, when you put it in paper, filling it, getting people to do that job, to update it, is difficult. We were working through the process with our new CRM system, which had brought in, so that actually something like this wouldn't be sitting with a pile of paper. It would actually be updated automatically. There'd be warnings for the appropriate management and staff. So in a sense, this is about bringing our technology up to date to address this. So again, whether I apologise previously, it didn't make me happy that it was out of date. I don't know why people didn't do, because actually this was escalated down to lower management to do as part of their roles and should have been keeping it up to date. So in a sense, you know, I can't get away from it, it's out of date. I think there was more up-to-date information available, but it wasn't there, so I just have to accept that responsibility.
Well, that's noted, but let's just look at page 146, where I took you to start with. You can see that the date for this section dealing with Grenfell Tower specifically was completed on the 25th of February 2002. But as we can see from the first page I took you to, there were 3 reviews after 2004. So this document seems to predate the emergency plan, or this part of it. There were further reviews, including reviews during your time, the last of which being at February 2016. My first question is, did you yourself play any part in the review of this document in 2016?
I would have played a part in terms of the top part of the document, the overall strategy, what we're saying there. What I didn't have was all the information below, because that didn't come to exec. Because in the sense that was seen very much at the exec level, that was locally held information that needed to be updated locally. You can obviously see from this that local staff didn't update it, but I think, it goes back to my point, I think we did have more up-to-date information on different systems, but not here, and that's my honest answer.
Do you know what prompted the review in February 2016?
Well, I think if you look at the dates, what we were trying to do as a company, get to a stage where the information or the policy or the strategy was more regularly reviewed than previously. So when I came in, there's huge amounts of policy procedures that hadn't been updated for years, and what we were trying to do was get through this whole area so we could have an up-to-date list, which is mostly, I think we listed in our health and safety report once a year, which showed policies being updated. In the sense,
was the fire at Adair Tower not a prompt for this review, do you remember?
I think if you look at the dates, the reviews are every 2 years. So I think with this one, we're updating the strategy every 2 years because it was important.
As part of the review, did nobody bring to your attention the fact that vast swathes, and it is vast swathes of Part 2, were out of date?
No.
Can you account for that?
I think I've tried, I can't account it. Why? We were very clear, and I was very clear, exec and senior management team, that this type of detail had to be reviewed locally because actually they had the information locally. So we had 3 local offices with local teams supporting our tenants, and they held the information there, and therefore it was their responsibility to fill these out. Partly while I accept it hasn't, partly the way we were moving towards the CRM system, because that's an audit system that prompts people to do it, and then actually if they don't do it, management can see it. So I've always worried about big piles of paper sitting somewhere where they're not being updated. So again, I can only apologise.
At any rate, you haven't been able to tell us from the disclosure of documents at phase 2 that you've seen why it was that the large parts of part 2 of this document were left obsolete for so long.
Well, again, what I said is it's been left obsolete because the management team or the staff who had responsibility, because there'd be individual neighbourhood officers that should know about it and should do it. And what we were trying to over years is introduce systems that were less passive in terms of management that we could audit, follow and challenge. So
those systems failed, didn't they? Because
not the CRM system, because that wasn't completely in place by then.
Given that Salvus had specifically advised the TMO in September 2009 that they needed to have, or you needed to have, an emergency plan, and indeed a building-specific emergency plan in accordance with the guidance, can you account for why you failed to have up-to-date plans for each building, including for Grenfell Tower?
So I think I've said 3 or 4 times the emergency plan was the emergency plan. The detail behind should have been filled in by staff and updated. And so that's my answer.
And I think as CEO you accept responsibility for that failure.
I accept responsibility that my staff obviously haven't carried out the instructions by their managers to do it.
Yes, and as CEO, the buck stopped with you, didn't it?
As a CEO, my job isn't to fill in 400 or 500 or 650 individual sheets or check them individually. That's why I have a staff team, management, structure. So if they fail to do it, yes, the buck stopped with me, but I can show a trail where actually this was not my responsibility to fill in. I accept my responsibility as chief exec, but not to fill in the details like this, because that sits with my local teams who are employed to do.
No, but the point I'm putting to you, Mr. Black, in reality is that as the chief executive, you are ultimately responsible for a failure to keep these documents up to date lower down in your organisation.
Pass.
Pass.
Well, what I'm saying, I think I've answered once, twice, 3, 4 times, and that's it, really. It should have been updated. I'm not shying away from that, and I reckon. So that's my situation.
Just to be absolutely clear, you're not shying away from the fact that it wasn't done, but are you shying away from the fact that it was your ultimate responsibility to ensure that it was done?
So again, my responsibility is to be responsible for everything, but then to have a structure in place, management, teams to actually do the work and follow the instructions of their manager.
I think we probably understand what you're saying, Mr. Black. It wasn't your job to fill in the individual sheets, and I don't think anyone's suggesting it was.
Sorry,
but I think
it did feel like that, Chair. It did feel like that.
I understand.
Apologies.
I think you're also accepting that, as with everything else within an organisation where there's devolved duties, you ultimately have to take responsibility for the way the system works or doesn't work.
I accept that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Now, let's look at some minutes from an executive team meeting in November 2015, TMO 00840450. This is dated the 11th of November 2015, as you can see from the date at the top. And if you go to page 2 of this document, and I'm so sorry, can we go back to page 1? I'll just show you that you are listed as present. There, you see that?
Yes.
Now, if we go to page 2, you can see that there was discussion about emergency plans under Adair Tower responses.
Yeah.
Now, just to help you with the chronology, you may be familiar with this, but 11th of November 2015 was 11 days or so after a fire at Adair Tower on the 31st of October 2015. And this is what this discussion is about, Adair Tower responses. Now, if you go down the screen to the fourth paragraph down, it says, the TMO's emergency plan was discussed, and it was agreed that it would be good for ET to have a session with Janice Ray and Hash Shamtune to get a greater understanding of who owns and updates it, and lessons learnt from the fire at Adair Tower, Jill to arrange. Jill, I think, is Jill Petford.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you were at the meeting, as I've shown you. Do you recall the detail of this discussion at all?
Yes, I think so.
You do. Do you remember why there was any question over who owned the emergency plan or who was responsible for updating it?
Can you confirm which paragraph? Sorry, I just got...
Yes, it's the fourth one down I read to you.
Yeah.
TMO's emergency plan was discussed.
I think it was a general thing in terms of actually, after a fire, we as an executive should meet together to find out actually what worked, what didn't, and take it from there. It's also about that link with RBKC.
Yes. The specific question I'm asking you is based on the words, to get a greater understanding of who owns and updates the emergency plan. And my question is, why was there any doubt or any question mark over who owned and was responsible for updating the emergency plan?
I think it was a refresh in the memory. Who owns it? It sat with policy. It sat with different people.
Was there an answer to that question that you ever got?
I can't recall at the moment, thank you.
Right. You don't remember one way or the other?
I can't recall that at the moment.
Now, do you remember whether you and the rest of the executive team had a session on the emergency plan to get a greater understanding of these matters?
I think Janice did one to the exec.
You say Janice did one to exec. Do you mean she made a presentation to you about it?
I can't remember if it's a presentation. She just came along and spoke to us, and
Right.
I know she went round and chatted to people who were involved and tried to get feedback so we could get.
Yes. I'm assuming that I'm so sorry.
Sorry, it's all right.
I'm assuming that the emergency plan referred to there is the two-part document we looked
Yeah.
at earlier. Do you remember her taking the executive team, including you, through that document?
Yes, but not the details at the back.
Right. Does that tell us that as part of that process you only had in front of you part one, or did you have the whole document but just didn't get as far as
We'd only
part two?
we would only had part one in terms of that. We wouldn't have had all the schedules behind.
But would you agree that a critical aspect of any emergency plan is the arrangements for communication of that plan to residents?
I'm trying to think that one.
Well,
Sorry.
I'm putting a proposition to you.
Yeah.
Would you agree with this proposition? It is a critical aspect of any emergency plan.
So again, sorry, this is the company's emergency plan, how it should operate in an emergency. In terms of, I think what you're trying to say or wanting to say is that in sense for the residents, that the plan was always stay put and be rescued by the fire brigade, or who would take control.
Well, I'm just putting a general proposition to you, Mr. Black, and you don't have to agree with it. But do you agree that a critical, important aspect of any emergency plan would include communication of the contents of that plan to residents, so far as it affects them?
I'm not sure if I would agree with that.
Okay. Well, let's look at some concerns raised by residents about the lack of information relating to an emergency plan. Can we go first, please, to TMO 100374439? This is a letter from the Grenfell Tower Leaseholders Association of the 3rd of September 2010. And it's addressed to you personally, dear Mr. Robert Black. And it's copied to others, including Anthony Parks and Sasha Jevons, as you can see. If we go to page 5 in this document, there is a heading, Fire Alarm and Health and Safety, towards the bottom of your screen. Now, just to help you with the context for this document, do you remember that there had been a fire at Grenfell Tower on the 30th of April 2010?
I think I did after
Yes.
selecting the documents.
Yes. And do you remember that one of the defects in Grenfell Tower's active fire safety measures revealed by that fire was that the smoke vent system did not operate correctly?
Yes.
Yes. And also that there was a problem, or said perhaps to be a problem, with the lift not responding when called by firefighters.
I don't know that one.
You don't know that one. Now, if you look at page 5, you can see that the author says, "We're very shocked to learn from you that you considered the defects in the building exposed by the fire as a minor fault when it had potentially fatal consequences. The minor fault caused so much damage to individuals living in Grenfell Tower, it's difficult to image how serious an event has to be for you to consider it a major fault. If the fire alarm system is not functioning and the vents are not working, then it should be considered, no doubt, as a major fault. They are used as measures to save lives, so if they're not working, then obviously you are endangering the lives of residents of the building. What's more, we are certain that out of 120 families living in the block, no one is aware of the evacuation procedure. We have never had an evacuation procedure booklet sent to us for the past 36 years. Is it not necessary by law to test the fire alarm and associated equipment on a regular basis to check whether the system is fully functional?" Now, bearing in mind, as we now know, and you now know, I think, that this is almost a year after the September 2009 Salvus Fire Safety Management Report that we've looked at, did that letter cause you to check what arrangements were in fact in place for communicating evacuation procedure to residents?
Well, I don't think there was a fire alarm system in this block.
Sorry, my
So
question...
I'm just reading it. People are saying they did not hear the fire alarm. just from my knowledge, and I may be wrong, I don't think there was a fire alarm system in the block.
But my question is...
Would that be true? I mean, you know all the stuff.
Well, my question to you is, at the time when you received this letter, did it cause you to check what arrangements were in place for communicating any evacuation procedures to residents?
So again, as far as I'm aware, the procedure was, in case of a fire, stay put, be rescued by the fire brigade, or for the fire brigade to come and make an assessment of the fire and them to make a decision about what they're going to do. That decision could be to evacuate the building, or it could be just to put the fire out. From my knowledge.
Yes. Did you check, having received this letter, what arrangements were in place for communicating to residents the relevant procedure in the event of a fire?
So we wouldn't, so in terms of stay put.
So, perhaps you're not understanding my question. I'll try once more. The question is about communication to residents. Did you, having received this letter, check what the arrangements were at Grenfell Tower for communicating what residents should do in the event of a fire to them?
No.
Why is that?
I suppose from looking back or reflecting here is that if there's again, I think the stay put policy is so ingrained in the system that if there's a fire, the fire brigade will be there and put out. If it's during the day, I think that this is difficult sometimes. If you have fire during the day and we know about it, then we'll have staff there. But generally, we're waiting for the fire brigade to come to take control. And there's no evacuation policy unless the fire brigade decide to evacuate the building.
Yes. Did the receipt of this message lead you to instigate a process for this building whereby all the residents were reminded, whether by notice or by communication of some other kind, of what the arrangements for their safety would be in the event of a fire? I can't
Confirm that now.
Right.
I'd have to ask Janice.
Now, the issue of advice to residents came up again in 2016. You may remember this. Can we go to TMO 100111798, please? Let's go to page 4 in that. This is an email run where on page 4, 8th of January 2016, Councillor Mason writes to Councillor Marshall, and he says, Adair Tower fire. At the last CCSC meeting, that's Cabinet Corporate Scrutiny Committee meeting, I was asked to request if you could tell us what advice the TMO gives to its tenants in the case of a fire. This question came up because the Borough Fire Commander told the committee the last time he visited that although Adair Tower flats were fitted with smoke-proof doors, people opened them during the fire, letting in the smoke when they may have been safer staying indoors, and then started walking down 13 stories of smoke-filled stairs. Perhaps it's not possible to stop people leaving a building in panic during a fire. And if we go up to page 3 of this email run, at the bottom you can see that on the 9th of January 2016, Councillor Marshall writes to Councillor Mason in response, and you're copied into it, as is Laura Johnson. Pat, I'm not sure there is standard advice across the estate. Mr. Black, could you let us know what is normally advised, especially in towers? Also, could you give some thought to Councillor Mason's questions about weekends, etc.? Now, is this right that you then respond to that if you go up page 3 and back over to page 2, and indeed page 1, I think at the bottom of page 1 is where it starts, a long email, and you write to Barbara Matthews and Janice Ray, as you can see there, on the 11th of January. Hi, Barbara and Janice. Could you review both Councillor Mason and Councillor Marshall's points in the email below and draft me something I can send back, please? In reviewing it, I've added a bit in red. See what you think. Happy for you to edit and change. Robert, you can see that. So is it right that you needed them to provide the answer because you yourself didn't know it?
Yeah, I mean, with a question like that, I'd always copy in Janice and Barbara because in a sense they manage the fire, health and safety and more up to date than myself. So as Chief Exec, that's what I did generally.
Yeah.
And then they would send it back to me and we'd see.
and you can see, just to finish the email run off, at page 1, Janice Ray writes back to you the next day. Robert and Barbara, she's copied in. I've added some info in purple to your draft response. Please advise if you need anything further from me. And if you go down to the foot of page 1 again, you can see what she says there. Over to page 2 in relation to what the normal advice is, especially in towers. And the thrust of it is stay put. You see that. Now, if you go then to RBK 30581101, please. I'm going to show you the minutes of an RBKC Cabinet and Corporate Services Scrutiny Committee, CCSC, a little bit after this, on the 8th of February 2016, so the following month. And you can see who is in attendance there. You are not there, perhaps unsurprisingly. If you go to page 3 of the minutes, there's something I want to ask you about there. On page 3 in the second paragraph, it says, Councillor Campbell drew attention to the statement on page 1 that fire safety information is provided to residents on the TMO website. She considered this inadequate as not all residents would have access to the website. Referring to page 2, she drew attention to the comment that some dwellings were provided with LFB leaflets and asked which ones were not. The chairman undertook to take this up with the TMO. Now, do you accept that it's clear from this sequence of events, including the email run, that RBKC councillors had concerns about the provision or lack of provision of fire safety information to residents in early 2016?
I can't mean Pat wrote to me. I know Pat and his situation. He's responding. And Councillor Campbell, I don't know what happened after this.
Yes. Do you remember that these questions, as is clear from the 8th of January email, resulted or arose as a result of an actual fire?
Yeah.
Adair Tower?
Yeah.
Yes. Did that fact suggest to you that whatever the TMO was doing about informing residents of emergency plans in their building, it wasn't working?
I think, yes, I would say that it would seem like we could have done better.
Now, going forward in the year 2016, TMO 00863 this is an email run between Councillor Mason, who was the chair of the CCSC, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong about that. To you, and if we go to page 3, we can see an email from Councillor Mason to you on the 14th of April, as you can see there. And it says, Dear Robert, fire safety information to residents. At the last meeting of the Cabinet and Corporate Services Scrutiny Committee, where there was an update on the Adair Tower fire, it was noted that fire safety information is provided to residents on the TMO website. One committee member wondered if this was adequate, given that not all residents would have access to the internet for various reasons. Is this information provided to residents in other ways? And you copied Janice Ray in and Barbara Matthews. If you go up to the bottom of page 2, above that, in response to Councillor Mason, you say, I'll ask my team to review and come back to you. And then if you scroll up a little bit, please, to the bottom of page 1, second half of page 1, Janice Ray responds to Councillor Mason, copying you and Barbara Matthews in on the 15th of April 2016. And she says, further to your inquiry regarding provision of fire safety information to residents, I can confirm that this is provided in a number of ways. She says, as per the update presented to Scrutiny Committee, fire safety information is available on the KCTMO website. In addition, new tenants receive a letter outlining their fire procedure, providing some safety advice, and enclosing a copy of the referral leaflet for anyone wishing to arrange a free London Fire Brigade LFB home fire safety visit. Copies of letter and leaflet attached. Fire safety articles are regularly included in our KCTMO publications, The Link and the Home Ownership newsletter. And then there's a reference to specifically in relation to Adair and Hazelwood Towers, shortly be installing fire action notices setting out the action to be taken in the event of a fire in the flat and elsewhere in the building. Then she goes on, further, I would advise that we liaise closely with the LFB to facilitate their familiarisation visits to our blocks, particularly the high-rise and potentially higher risk blocks. Where possible, we produce joint publicity in advance of their visit, and as part of the exercise, we encourage the LFB to offer a free home fire safety visit to any resident who wishes to have one. And it goes on like that. And then over the page at page 2, after a reference to the roadshow, our fire risk assessor regularly posts LFB leaflets through residents' doors as part of his assessment. And then at the end she says, finally, I would advise that we're currently reviewing our fire strategy to ensure that our approach continues to effectively control fire risks. The issue of publicising / communicating the fire safety message is one of the areas to which we will be paying particular attention. Now, that's a lengthy response, which I've read most of to you. Was that response a comprehensive explanation of the TMO's communication of an emergency plan to residents as you understood it at the time?
Yes.
It was. Now then, if we go forward in the year 2016 to November, TMO 100047662, this is a notice of deficiency from the LFB on the 17th of November 2016 in relation to Grenfell Tower. Were you aware at the time that this had been issued?
I'm sure I would have done, but I can't recall. So what I can say is, having gone through the paperwork preparing for this, I've come across this. I'm just trying to remember actually the time, if I knew it.
Yes, and we have had difficulties pinning down precisely when you did see it. Are you able to help? But to help you in your recollection, it looks as if you had seen it by your CEO report of March 2017. Did you see it in November 2016 when it was issued, or shortly thereafter? Do you remember?
I can't remember, I'm afraid. If it's in my report, if it's in the report that came later, then I would have seen it somewhere, or it would have been reported to me, but I can't remember at that specific time.
Right. Now, let's look at page 6 of this document. This is one of the deficiencies identified by the LFB in the deficiency notice. And if you look at the bottom of your screen, it says, Article 15.1, at the time of the audit, your procedures to be followed in the event of serious and imminent danger were inadequate. It was found that fire action notices were not displayed in your common parts. And if you go to steps considered necessary to remedy the failures on the right-hand side of your screen in the lower box there, adequate procedures for dangerous and imminent danger and for danger areas should be established and followed. This can be achieved by displaying fire action notices in the common parts of your building. Did you yourself, when you did see this document, investigate what procedures existed for Grenfell Tower for serious and imminent danger?
No.
Why is that?
I'm looking at this about fire notices. I suppose my question would be, were fire notices put up across the old estates, not just Grenfell Tower? I don't know that at this moment.
Let me try it a different way. Did you investigate how it had come about, notwithstanding what you had been told earlier in the year, and notwithstanding the exchanges between the councillors earlier in the year we've seen, why it was that later on that year fire action notices were not displayed in the common parts of Grenfell Tower?
I can't recall, apologise.
Did you look into that?
I can't recall at that time.
Right. Did it not come as a surprise to you to discover that, notwithstanding what Janice Ray had told you and the councillors at the time, early in the spring of 2016, the LFB had picked this up as a deficiency later that year?
In reflection, I would have to accept that.
Now, let's look at TMO 100152449, page 3 at the bottom. This is an email to you from Councillor Blakeman, Judith Blakeman, on the 24th of November 2016. No, let me try again. TMO 100152449. 5249. Yes, thank you. And very bottom of page 3, you can just see Judith Blakeman, 23rd November 2016. And then if we go over to page 4, you can see that it's addressed to you at the very top of your screen, page 4. Subject, Grenfell Tower, brackets again, exclamation mark, close brackets. Dear Robert, while Mr. Daffan engages in hyperbole in his Grenfell Action Group blog, it is read by most residents of the tower, and the most recent article causes me concern. Now, you may recall the blog.
Not off the top of my head, no.
Well, let's just look down at the quotation from it. In this email, and it says this: in the last 20 years, and despite the terrifying power surge incident in 2013 and recent fire at Adair Tower, the residents of Grenfell Tower have received no proper fire safety instructions from the KCTMO. Residents were informed by a temporary notice stuck in the lift and one announcement in a recent regeneration newsletter that they should remain in their flats in the event of fire. There are not, and have never been any, instructions posted in the Grenfell Tower notice board or on individual floor as to how residents should act in event of a fire. Anyone who witnessed the recent tower block fire at Shepherd's Court in nearby Shepherd's Bush will know that the advice to remain in our properties would have led to certain fatalities, and we are calling on our landlord to reconsider the advice that they have so badly circulated. Now, whether or not you read the blog at the time, which was a few days before this, do you agree, looking at that Mr. Daffan was clearly concerned at the lack of information about what to do in the event of a fire at Grenfell Tower?
Yes.
Yes. And his blog, as quoted there by Judith Blakeman, suggests at least that the communication of fire safety instructions within that building was not succeeding. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Now, let's go back to the first paragraph of her email. I've read you the first sentence. She goes on, Mr. Daffan discussed the fire safety issue with me at a recent meeting, and I did point out that the instructions in the event of fire had been included in one of the refurbishment newsletters. However, I do take his point that instructions are not permanently available on notice boards, nor in a discreet letter to all residents, and in appropriate languages where required, and I am asking whether this can be rectified. Now, we now see what you did with this. If we go to page 2 at the bottom of that email run, you ask Janice to respond, and we can see that response on page 2, towards the bottom of the screen. Dear Councillor Blakeman, Robert has asked me to respond to your email highlighting fire safety issues raised by Mr. Daffan in his blog. You see that?
Yeah.
And then she says this: with regard to fire procedures in Grenfell Tower, I can confirm that these were included in newsletters to the block, and they are also documented on our website. Further, we do publish regular fire safety articles in The Link magazine to all residents, and we write to all new tenants to outline the fire safety strategy, the fire strategy for their block, the procedure to follow in the event of a fire in their flat, and also a fire elsewhere in their block, and advise them of the London Fire Brigade's LFB free home safety fire visit and how to access this. Additionally, I can advise that we are currently considering a programme of installation of fire action notices similar to those now installed at Adair and Hazelwood Towers across all blocks. There has been a difference of opinion amongst London Fire Brigade officers on the value of fitting these notices within a block with a stay-put fire strategy. However, we are keen to be proactive about this, and I can confirm that we will be proceeding with the fitting of these notices at Grenfell Tower. It's likely that this will be completed within the next 2 weeks. So, would you agree with this? As per the response to Councillor Mason that had come from Janice Ray early in 2016, the instructions in the event of a fire were disseminated in a number of ways. Refurbishment letters? Yes?
Yeah.
Yes. Website?
Yes.
Regular fire safety articles, although not necessarily about evacuation, in The Link magazine.
Yeah.
And writing to all new tenants to outline the fire safety strategy. Yes?
Yes.
Did you think that that was enough?
I think the problem we face, I mean, I'm not it should have, maybe in reflection, should do more, whatever. The trouble is actually how to give information to people. And I think one of the things now, if you look now, is there are so much more technological ways to actually get, if you have the information, to get directly to tenants. We found, I think, generally letters not to be very effective because actually people don't open their mail. And we did do quite a lot of lettering, but the feedback, you know, you would go along and it's there. So I think fire notices are visible, and that's the key thing. But I think it's probably something I would have to say we struggled with. How do you actually get people to take the information in unless you meet them individually, and that would come down to doing housing management. I think that's also why we tried to have the resident engagement events, because actually with those events you can have all my staff on the site at the same time, and you can have stalls everywhere where we give out that information. So there was one at Lancaster West, I think not long after this, where I think the fire brigade attended. That's me thinking rather than knowing. So we did try, I think, to do other things, because actually probably you just need to keep on trying.
Now, if we go back to the bottom of page 1 of this email run, Judith Blakeman responds to Janice Ray, also on the 24th of November 2016, and at the very top of page 2, she says, "Many thanks for this. I think the TMO often puts too much faith in the link and generic newsletters. Even when read, they are then discarded, so residents do not have a permanent record of information unless they have the nature of an archivist. This is why personalised letters are sometimes of more value. However, I think in this instance that fire action notices on each floor will meet the problem." Didn't Councillor Blakeman here actually hit the nail on the head? Residents needed a permanent record of information on what to do in the event of a fire.
Well, I don't think if you're meaning that you give someone a letter, they file it, put it in the drawer and forget it, they're not archivists. I think you probably have to do things, in retrospect, you probably have to do things more frequently. So there's a constant thing, and I think that's what Janice was suggesting, that you don't just do one thing. Fire notices, we do visits, we have the fire brigade, it's just like to keep it going. But her point, I think, can be fair, that we put a lot of faith in the link and generic newsletter, but actually feedback historically that those are better than letters, because actually you don't have to open the letter. There's actually something go through your door and people read it, and if you've got some interesting, people do it. So the link in the newsletter developed over, or certainly link changed quite a lot to try to bring information in from that makes it interesting for people to want to read it. And if you have your fire or health and safety articles in there, research has shown that's much more effective than a letter through the door, which is, again, some people open, some people don't. It's a difficult thing about how to communicate. I suppose nowadays what you do text. You'd have like text alerts that everybody, because you'll have people's information. So you might just do a text blast, event of fire, stay put. I think at that time that wasn't one of the options, sort of thing. But obviously nowadays I'm sure people are thinking that, because actually most people have a phone.
Your response we can see on page 1, same day, 24th November 2016, to Judith Blakeman, copy to Janice Ray and Barbara Matthews. And you say, "I'll ask Janice to have a look at the area you mentioned and get an update for you. On the other subject, our experience and others is individual letters are not effective either, as they're not opened or read or filed. This is an area where the company has to do certain things to protect itself and its starts with all new tenants, and then reminding residents on a regular basis. We also do fire checks, and our fire consultants will speak to people when he's doing his checks. I agree the fire notices on each floor will address the problem as well." Now, does that statement there represent your understanding at the time of how an emergency plan was to be communicated to residents?
Yes.
Yes. So just to summarise, new letters to new tenants, regular reminders, presumably through the Link magazine, Mr. Stokes doing his rounds, and now fire action notices.
Yes, and again, I think there's a lot of debate about how effective is it. So we had lots of notice boards across the organisation. One of my great opportunities was doing estate checks on notice boards on a regular basis, which gave Theresa Brown huge amounts of difficulties, because actually the notice boards were supposed to be updated, there was sort of design. So, but again, people take things down if you don't have the glass in front of them. So I think there was a concern about how this constant thing of trying to put up notices. But yes, so in principle, how do you get people to accept information is a challenge.
But do you accept that the message you're giving here does not appear to have got through at least to one of Grenfell Tower's long-standing residents, namely Mr. Daffan?
I accept.
Yes. Now, let's turn to a completely new topic, which is the oversight or review of maintenance arrangements. Mr. Chairman, I'm loath to give up 4 minutes unless we sit 4 minutes earlier.
3, I think, but still, keep going.
Yes. Then I think I'm in your hands as to whether we start this new topic or not.
Is this a substantial topic?
It is a substantial enough topic not to finish it in 3 or 4 minutes.
Wouldn't it be sensible to give yourself a clean run?
It would.
At 2 o'clock?
It would.
I think it would. Mr. Black, I think it's time we stop for lunch, notwithstanding the fact that we've still got 3 minutes to go this morning. We'll break now until 2 o'clock, please. And please remember not to speak to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it over the break.
Thank you very much.
All right? Thank you very much. I'd like to go to the usher. Thank you very much. 2 o'clock, please. Thank you.